Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America. If you've been following along with our previous episodes, welcome back, and if this is your first time listening to the show, welcome aboard. This daily show covers 1 year of American history per episode and will end on July 4th of 2026. Researching, producing, and promoting this show is all a labor of love. I'm not a historian, I am a homeschooled young American and wanted to do something special for America's 250th birthday. The more I learn about America and our history, the deeper love that I feel for this country, and that's a passion I hope to pass on. So thank you for listening to Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America. Today, we will be covering 1781, the year that finally turns the tides in this revolution. The year starts with the double cross, and the focus of this episode will mainly be the Battle of Yorktown, as when I was researching it, I found tons of details that I just had to include. Make sure to check out our X, where we will be posting tons of photos and portraits depicting the events that we're covering here today. Let's get into the episode. Welcome to 1781 in America. When we last left Washington and his men, they were in camp at Morristown for the winter. It's now January 1st, and the year starts with mutiny. As we discussed at the end of the last episode, and as has been a recurring theme throughout the Revolution, Washington is struggling to adequately supply his men with supplies and provisions. For the 11 regiments under Anthony Wayne's command, this winter is a breaking point. Housed in log huts under freezing conditions and going unpaid for over a year, roughly 1,500 men believe their 3-year terms, signed in late 76 or early 77, have now expired. Officers at the camp, however, claim they have enlisted for the duration of the war. So, frustrated, these soldiers turn out of their shelters, parading and shooting their weapons. In a protest that devolves into a violent riot, Captain Adam Benton refuses to allow the mutiny and draws his sword. He is shot and killed as the mob grows. Colonel William Butler and General Anthony Wayne attempt to calm the troops, but they are pushed aside, and in the chaos, another 2 officers are killed. By morning the next day, virtually the entire Pennsylvania line, minus its officers, is marching to Princeton. Wayne pursues them and asks for a sergeant from each regiment to represent the soldiers' grievances. General Washington replies to a letter Wayne sends describing the mutiny. He fears the men might be enticed to defect, or that they may even descend on Philadelphia, but reasons that if negotiation begins, they may be able to reach a reasonable settlement. He plans to leave the camp at New Windsor and deal with the affair, but changes his mind, thinking the issue will be decided before he can arrive. That same day, the soldiers enter Princeton and deliver their official propositions to General Wayne. They ask for immediate discharge for men enlisted in 76 and 77 at a $20 payout, and discharge at the end of 3-year service for those enlisted since 77 at a $120 bounty. Additionally, they ask for pay and clothing for those who remain enlisted, and that there be no punishment for the mutiny after the issue is settled. Wayne agrees that a peaceful resolution will bring a general pardon and offers discharges to those entitled to it. On behalf of the men, Sergeant William Buzar replies that he doesn't think Wayne intends to release all of the entitled men, so Wayne offers to assemble a committee of officials from Pennsylvania at Trenton. The Board of Sergeants refuses, and President of Congress Joseph Reed holds a meeting. The consensus being that Congress cannot use force to end the mutiny, and that a quick negotiation may be the only way to keep the men from defecting to the British. Joseph Reed travels to Princeton to personally meet with Wayne and the men in revolt. As is feared, British General Henry Clinton sends 2 spies from New York to meet with the mutineers and offer them a full pardon as well as paying them what the Continental Army owed them, in exchange for fighting on behalf of the British. Both spies are captured and held by the mutineers who are still not looking to commit treason. As Joseph Reed is about to meet with the men at Princeton, both him and Anthony Wayne discuss fears that the soldiers may treat him badly. But he goes in anyway, and upon his arrival he finds the entire group of men lined up for inspection. Reed concludes that the men's grievances are legitimate and that some officers had indeed tricked and punished soldiers to extend their enlistments. After some negotiations, Reed sends his proposal to the sergeants and says that should the terms be refused, using force will be his only option. He offers to discharge all soldiers who have been retained beyond their enlistments or coerced into re-enlistment. And for the large number of men whose enlistment papers are unavailable, Reed allows them to simply give an oath stating their time served. On January 8th, the sergeants agree to Reed's proposal, and he stipulates that before his proposal can be carried out, they must provide him with the 2 captured British agents, which they do, and both men soon hang. As a result of the discharge, the Pennsylvania line is now diminished from about 2,400 men to 1,150. While a substantial loss in manpower, all the worst outcomes are avoided. The men would have probably abandoned their roles even if no deal was reached, and a large-scale use of force would have been a blight on morale across the country. An even worse outcome would have been for the spurned Continentals to head back to New York with the spies and join the British, tipping the scales further in their favor and providing otherwise unknown information to the British officers. Washington, for his part, is furious with Congress for letting it get this far, citing his previous pleas for more reliable rations and consistent pay, and begins to fear future revolts, especially among officers. Meanwhile, Maryland's General Assembly authorizes its delegates to sign the Articles of Confederation, ending a years-long battle to join. Congress adopted the Articles in November of '77, but under Article 8, the charter could not go into effect until all 13 states ratified it. Maryland has been the last holdout. Being a small state with no claims to Western lands, Maryland feared being permanently disadvantaged in a future union dominated by land-rich states such as Virginia, whose claim stretches from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River. Maryland's delegates, including Thomas Stone and Samuel Chase, argued that the Western lands should be ceded to the national government, becoming a common treasury for the benefit of all states. With the growing conflict in the Carolinas last year, Virginia, feeling threatened by a northern push, unofficially agrees to cede its claims northwest of the Ohio River, drawing what we now know as West Virginia's western border. On the 17th, Patriots score a much-needed win in South Carolina. The Continental forces are led by Brigadier General Daniel Morgan, a seasoned commander known for his understanding of both conventional warfare and frontier fighting. Opposing him is the infamous Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton, famed and feared for giving no quarter to surrendering Patriot troops last year. Morgan has carefully selected a battlefield near the Broad River, a pasture known as cowpens. He believes that Tarleton is likely to attack quickly and without careful planning, so anticipating this, Morgan devises a tactical formation designed to absorb and then counter Tarleton's assault. He places a line of sharpshooters in front, followed by a second line of militia who he orders to fire 2 volleys, then retreat. Behind them, on a gentle rise, Morgan positions his Continental regulars. As expected, Tarleton attacks at dawn, confident that his fast-moving troops can scatter Morgan's men. Tarleton's charging men engage the sharpshooters, who fall back after placing effective shots on target. The British charge into the second line, the militia, who also fire and retreat as planned. Believing the Americans are running away, Tarleton orders a full advance of his men. As the British crest the hill, they encounter the main American line previously hidden, well prepared and steady. The Continentals open fire at close range as Morgan orders a flanking movement by cavalry. They strike the British from the right, while the militiamen who had pretended to flee now strike from the rear. Caught in a crossfire and surrounded, much of the British line collapses. American troops press the advantage, capturing hundreds, while Tarleton himself narrowly escapes, pursued briefly by the cavalry. In all, over 800 British soldiers are killed, wounded, or captured, and American losses are comparatively light, about 150 casualties, 25 of which are killed. After this devastating defeat, Cornwallis is ever more determined to destroy the army of General Greene. He begins a relentless pursuit of Greene across the Carolinas in a grueling race that becomes known as the Race to the Dan. Elsewhere, on January 20th, spurred by the success of their compatriots, about 300 soldiers from the New Jersey line of the Continental Army mutiny, making their way to Trenton to issue demands for a redress of grievances to the Continental Congress. Though for them, the outcome is much different. Washington, determined not to repeat the outcome of the Pennsylvania Line Mutiny, immediately orders a detachment to head from West Point under the command of General Howe to intercept the men. Howe's men surround the mutineers by surprise and stand the two leaders, Sergeants David Gilmore and John Tuttle, in front of the men before ordering they fire. These prospective mutineers, killing their own leaders and thus quashing their own attempts at redress, are said to be contrite and penitent as they return to their duties. This harsh punishment aims to discourage further mutinies and maintain order within the Continental Army at a time when victory is ever so nearly within reach, yet Loyalist sentiment is growing even more popular. In an effort to back the winner and avoid the hardships of enlisting in an under-equipped and ostensibly broke army, early 1781, by some counts, sees more Americans enlisting for the British than for Washington's force. At another low point for the American morale during the Revolution, George Washington writes, "The people are discontented, but it is with the feeble and oppressive mode of conducting the war, not with the war itself." In the South, Patriot commanders Lieutenant Colonel Light Horse Henry Lee and Brigadier General Francis Swamp Fox Marion combine forces and plan a raid on Georgetown, South Carolina, which is defended by 200 British soldiers. Their force of fewer than 200 approaches Georgetown stealthily, navigating through swamps and thick forests to avoid detection. In the early hours of January 24th, they launch a coordinated strike, moving quickly and silently, bypassing outposts and heading straight for the home of Lieutenant Colonel George Campbell, the British commanding officer. There, Marion and Lee's men successfully capture 3 British officers, including Colonel Campbell himself, who is reportedly taken from his bed in a swift maneuver. The raid is so sudden that the British garrison has no time to organize a defense. The remaining troops rush into defensive positions and retain control of the town, at least for now. Elsewhere in the Carolinas, the race to the Dan draws to a close. Greene executes a strategic withdrawal, crossing the Dan River into Virginia on February 14th. Cornwallis, who has burned his own supply wagons to move faster, fails to catch up to Greene, missing him by hours, and now finds himself deep in enemy territory with little support. He retreats to Hillsborough, North Carolina, to regroup and rally Loyalist support, while similarly, Greene gathers reinforcements from Virginia and North Carolina militias. Greene soon has nearly 4,500 men under his command, a mixed force of Continental regulars and militia. And though most of his troops are untrained, Greene decides the time is right to confront Cornwallis, and he sets off for Guilford Courthouse. The end of February sees the passing of 2 signers of the Declaration. First, let's look into the life of George Taylor. Taylor immigrated to the colonies from Ireland as an indentured servant in 1736 when he was 20 years old. At first, Taylor was employed by an ironmaster as a filler, shoveling coal into the furnace when in blast. Though when the ironmaster found he could read and write, Taylor was given the role of clerk in the family-owned furnace company. In 1747, Taylor was appointed captain of the Chester County Militia formed by Benjamin Franklin to provide security against frontier violence. Taylor became active in public affairs and was commissioned as a Justice of the Peace in 1757. Taylor was sent to the Pennsylvania Assembly in October of 75, where he helped to draft instructions to the Pennsylvania delegates to the Continental Congress. The original instructions called for voting against separation, but those instructions were rescinded in June of 76. When several state delegates chose not to vote in favor for the Declaration of Independence, the Assembly chose 5 replacements, George Taylor being one of them. In January of 77, he was selected by the Congress to arrange and preside at the Indian Treaty Conference in Easton, Pennsylvania. In March, he was elected to the new Pennsylvania Supreme Executive Council, but retired shortly thereafter due to illness. On February 23rd, George Taylor passes away at the age of 65. He was one of only 8 of the signers to be born outside of the colonies and the only one who was previously an indentured servant. Just 5 days later, Richard Stockton dies. In his early life, Stockton attended the College of New Jersey, graduating in 1748 at the age of 18. Stockton was admitted to the bar in 54, to the grade of counselor in 58, and in 1763, he received the degree of sergeant at law, the highest degree of law attainable. Stockton was elevated to a seat in the Royal Executive Council of New Jersey, and dreading the possibility of war, on December 12th of 74, he drew up and sent to Lord Dartmouth a plan for self-government of America, independent of Parliament but owing allegiance to the Crown. When his attempts to change the minds of the British failed, he decided he must, when given a choice of king or country, choose his native country. He resigned his royal appointments, and New Jersey elected him to the Continental Congress in 76, going on to sign the Declaration. When the British invaded New Jersey, Stockton rushed home and moved his family to the home of a friend 30 miles from Princeton. He was later captured there on November 30th by Loyalists in the dead of night, dragged from his bed and marched in freezing weather, clad only in a nightshirt and breeches. He was turned over to the British and sent to prison in New York. The darkest days of his life were spent locked in irons, starving and shivering in the cold winter of 76. Washington was directed by Congress to protest the treatment of the Honorable Richard Stockton to General William Howe, who granted him parole in mid-January. Stockton was sick and near death when he returned to his family, and his home had been occupied by Cornwallis. Dr. Benjamin Rush wrote, "The whole of Mr. Stockton's furniture, apparel, and even valuable writings have been burnt. All his cattle, horses, hogs, sheep, grain, and forage have been carried away by them." Stockton's library, considered one of the finest in the colonies, was burned and looted, and he was forced to accept help from his family and friends to survive. Because of Stockton's poor health and the parole requiring him not to participate in the war effort, he resigned from Congress. Rush wrote that it took Stockton nearly 2 years to recover his health, though after briefly recovering and returning to practicing law, he developed cancer, leading to his passing on the 28th of this month. On March 1st, the Articles of Confederation are finally ratified by all 13 states, formally establishing the first United States Constitution. John Hanson, along with Daniel Carroll, sign on behalf of Maryland. The last state holding out as the Western Lands status was being litigated. The ratification is an important milestone. It's the first real step towards uniting the states under a central government, however limited its powers might be. There remain massive disagreements between representatives about just how much control the central government should have to dictate what the states ought to do, and what they are required to do. Though most serious conversations are tabled for now, as winning the war draws focus away from the discussion of what to do with the country should it be won. As a result, the Articles reflect a profound commitment to state sovereignty, with the central government having no executive, no judiciary, and very limited legislative power. With ratification, the Articles of Confederation now become the official framework for the United States national government, though in practice the Continental Congress has already been operating under its structure since '77. Under these now ratified articles, Congress has the power to conduct foreign affairs, declare and wage war, coin money, and settle disputes between states. It cannot levy taxes, regulate commerce, or enforce laws. These powers remain with the states. Decisions require the approval of at least 9 states, and amendments require a unanimous vote. To get a better idea of all that's included in the now ratified Articles of Confederation, you can head over to either our YouTube or Rumble, where there is a reading of the text in full. Now, back in '79, Spain has joined France in the war against Britain, without overtly backing the Americans. King Charles III of Spain is hesitant about the precedent he may set by encouraging the population of another empire to overthrow their monarch. Nevertheless, Spain does want to defend its land claims in North America as part of a larger campaign that includes reclaiming Gibraltar. On March 9th, Spanish General Bernardo de Galvez and a naval force of more than 40 ships and 3,500 men land at Santa Rosa Island and begin a 2-month siege of the British occupying forces that becomes known as the Battle of Pensacola. As this fight is somewhat tangential to the American fight for independence, we'll leave it there for now and check back at the end of the siege. For now, we head back to North Carolina. Greene chooses to make a stand at the Guilford Courthouse, as the location offers defensible terrain and roads leading to key strategic points. He arranges his roughly 4,500 troops in 3 successive lines. The first composed of North Carolina militia, the second of Virginia militia, and the third, the strongest line, composed of Continental regulars from Maryland and Delaware. On March 15th, Cornwallis advances with a smaller but seasoned force of roughly 1,900 men. He knows Greene's army outnumbers his 2-1, but Cornwallis hopes that British discipline and aggression will overwhelm the Americans before they can effectively use their superior numbers. The battle begins late in the morning as Cornwallis moves through wooded terrain under constant fire from Greene's first line. The North Carolina militia, though inexperienced, inflicts significant casualties with their initial volleys, but quickly breaks under pressure. Some flee the field after firing just 1 or 2 shots, just as Greene expects. As the British move forward, they engage the Virginia militia in Greene's second line. These troops fight more stubbornly and are watched by sentinels to ensure they don't make an early retreat. These Virginians fiercely fight, but the British once again push through, though at increasing cost. The most intense fighting occurs when the British reach the third line. Here, the Maryland and Delaware Continentals fight with skill and tenacity. Cornwallis orders the engagement of his elite guards, who fight the Patriots in brutal hand-to-hand combat in a chaotic battlefield. Finally, seeing his lines endangered, Cornwallis orders his artillery to fire grape shot into the melee, willing to sacrifice his own troops to break the American line. The gamble works, and Greene, seeing the risk of encirclement and unwilling to sacrifice his army, orders a retreat. Though he cedes the field, his army remains intact and mostly unbroken. Cornwallis holds the ground but has lost a quarter of his men with over 500 casualties, including many irreplaceable officers and veteran soldiers. Cornwallis wins the field but is losing his grip on the South. He now faces a strategic dilemma: remain in the Carolinas or move north in search of better prospects. Frustrated and low on supplies, he eventually decides to march north into Virginia in hopes of linking with reinforcements. Back in Florida, reinforcements have arrived, increasing Galvez's total force to 7,800. On the morning of May 8th, After 2 months of brutal fighting, the 18-year British occupation of Pensacola ends with a British surrender by General John Campbell. As a result of the successful siege, Spain now controls West Florida, with its capital being Pensacola, while East Florida is still under British control, their capital located in St. Augustine. East Florida provides a safe haven for fleeing loyalists and valuable access to the Gulf and the Atlantic. Far up north on May 22nd, Washington and Rochambeau meet in Wethersfield, Connecticut to plan their summer campaign. Initially, they consider attacking New York City, currently being held by Henry Clinton with strong British defenses. They agreed to prepare for a possible strike in New York, but remain open to changing targets based on British movements and opportunities. In economic news, continental dollars have become so worthless that they cease to circulate as money. Benjamin Franklin notes that the depreciation of the currency has, in effect, acted as a tax to pay for the war. It's for this reason Quakers, whose pacifism does not permit them to pay war taxes, have been refusing to use Continentals for some time now. Congress has acknowledged the failure of this fiat currency last year, but now something is finally being done about it. Congress begins withdrawing the Continental dollars from circulation, formally retiring them, and is setting up a plan to buy out the notes at a rate of 1,000 Continentals for one new dollar. A note backed by gold and silver. Robert Morris takes office as the Superintendent of Finance, and drawing on the recommendations of Alexander Hamilton, and with the help of Haym Salomon, Morris proposes the creation of a centralized banking institution modeled partly on the Bank of England. He believes this will instill confidence in the public and foreign allies, particularly France, which is supplying crucial loans. On May 26th, Congress passes a resolution approving the plan and charters the bank under the authority from the Articles of Confederation, and by the end of the year, the bank will be incorporated. On the night of June 3rd, a little-known 26-year-old captain in the Virginia militia named Jack Jewett is at the Cuckoo Tavern about 40 miles from Charlottesville. Jewett observes a group of about 250 mounted British soldiers led by the infamous cavalry officer Banastre Tarleton, and realizes they're headed to Charlottesville, where the Virginia state legislature is assembled. He immediately takes off on his horse to warn Thomas Jefferson and the others of the approaching danger. While Tarleton's men take the main roads towards Charlottesville, Jewett cuts through forests and uses back roads to beat them to Monticello, Jefferson's plantation home. A near full moon provides his only light on the ride. Jewett arrives at Jefferson's home ahead of the British and frantically pounds on the door. Jefferson and other Virginia Assembly members who are staying as his guests flee, taking their families. Jefferson is the last to leave by many accounts, vacating only minutes before Tarleton's men arrive. Jack Jewett goes on to warn other members of the Virginia legislature after heading into Charlottesville. They have little that they can do but arm themselves and move to safety, as most of Virginia's soldiers are with George Washington. Because of Jewett's warnings, Tarleton doesn't do much damage. He goes on to capture some legislature members who could not escape, and commandeers supplies meant for American soldiers, but falls short of his goal of capturing the most influential Patriot leaders in Virginia. It's often speculated that should Jewett not have made his midnight ride, Richard Henry Lee, Benjamin Harrison, Thomas Nelson Jr., Patrick Henry, and Thomas Jefferson all could have been captured or worse by the surprise raid. Though less known than Paul Revere's midnight ride, humble Captain Jack Jewett makes history tonight. There is only one portrait of Jewett, a silhouette cut by his son Matthew, and we've got it posted on our X if you are interested in seeing it. By early August, British General Charles Cornwallis receives instructions from his superior, General Henry Clinton, to establish a fortified position along the Virginia coast. The goal is to maintain a British presence in the region while allowing force resupply or evacuation by sea should the situation deteriorate. Cornwallis selects Yorktown, a small port town situated at the mouth of the York River, for its defensible terrain and deep water access, ideal for Royal Navy support. He begins entrenching his force of about 7,000 British and German troops, constructing extensive fortifications on land and positioning batteries to secure the river. As we discussed earlier, Washington and Rochambeau have been considering an attack on New York City. But on August 14th, Rochambeau receives a crucial letter from Admiral de Grasse, commander of the French fleet in the Caribbean. De Grasse informs him that instead of sailing to New York as originally discussed, the French fleet will head to Chesapeake Bay, arriving with approximately 3,000 troops and the promise of temporary naval superiority over the British. This changes everything. Washington immediately alters his strategy. Rather than attempt the costly and uncertain siege of New York, he decides to march the Franco-American army, now over 4,000 troops strong, 400 miles south to Virginia. The plan is to converge with Lafayette's American forces already shadowing Cornwallis and join with de Grasse's fleet and reinforcements to encircle and besiege Yorktown. The movement is conducted with utmost secrecy to prevent the British from realizing that the main Continental Army has left the Hudson River Valley. Throughout the summer, General George Washington and French General Rochambeau go to great lengths to convince Clinton that New York City is their target. They send false correspondence and make sure intercepted messages reinforce the ruse. They stage troop movements, construct camps, and even request boats and supplies, all pointing to an imminent assault on New York. This crucial turning point sets the stage for this year's main topic, the Siege of Yorktown, which will begin in earnest by late September. On August 19th, Congress passes an act saying they will recognize the secessionist state of Vermont, formed in 77, and agree to admit that state to the Union if Vermont will renounce its claims to territory east of the Connecticut River and west of Lake Champlain. For now, the offer goes unanswered. On September 1st, the American charade is over. Clinton now realizes Washington and Rochambeau are not moving toward New York, but south to Virginia. He urgently dispatches a fleet from New York to intercept de Grasse's West Indian fleet and the French fleet accompanying it. 4 days later, a British fleet under Admiral Thomas Graves attempts to break the French naval blockade at the Chesapeake Bay, leading to the Battle of the Capes. Despite intense fighting, the British fleet is unable to defeat de Grasse's, and is forced to retreat to New York for repairs after only 2 hours of engagement. This decisive naval battle ensures continued French control of the Chesapeake Bay, sealing Cornwallis' fate by preventing any marine escape or reinforcement. What was originally seen as a strong strategic position with plenty of access to the Royal Navy via the York River and Chesapeake Bay is now a trap. The French blockade holds strong and Cornwallis' army is bottled up on the York Peninsula. By September 14th, Washington and Rochambeau arrive in Williamsburg, Virginia, to join forces with Lafayette and coordinate the Siege of Yorktown. Their arrival marks the unification of American and French land forces, totaling approximately 17,000 troops, split almost evenly amongst Americans and French, and they're poised to confront Cornwallis' army of between 7,500 and 8,000 that are entrenched at Yorktown. The Journal of Ebenezer Denny, a major in the Continental Army, an artifact we'll continue to reference throughout the siege, is a great window into what it felt like on the ground over 240 years ago. In his entry from September 15th, he says, "Officers all pay their respects to the Commander-in-Chief. Go in a body. Those who are not personally known, their names given by General Hand and General Wayne. He stands in the door, takes every man by the hand, the officers all pass in, receiving his salute and shake. This the first time I had seen the general. On the 17th, Washington and Rochambeau hold a council aboard the Ville de Paris to plan the siege. The plan that emerges is a simple one. De Grasse will land artillery, then maintain control at sea as the Allied Patriot French Army will encircle Yorktown and begin using the artillery to bombard it. During bombardment, trenches will be dug to approach Cornwallis fortifications. On the 23rd, Cornwallis sends a message to Clinton saying, "If you cannot relieve me very soon, you must be prepared to hear the worst." On the 28th, the combined French-American army marches from Williamsburg to Yorktown, initiating the siege. After the grueling march and their arrival near Yorktown, they immediately begin the hard work of laying siege to Cornwallis and his men. Cornwallis has thrown up a series of redoubts on the outskirts of Yorktown, while the majority of his men hunker down in the town. The Allies begin to encircle the British fortifications, cutting off land-based escape routes and preparing for their systematic assault. With the help of French engineers, American and French troops begin to carve out a series of parallel trenches, which bring troops and artillery close enough to inflict damage on the British. Working night and day, soldiers of the combined forces dig with spades and axes to create a perimeter line of trenches that trap the British. As the work on the parallels continues, the British attempt to disrupt Allied operations by using what little artillery they have. It proves ineffectual, and by the 1st of October, Washington's forces have overrun the outer fortifications, installing artillery behind this line, and now able to pummel Yorktown at close range. Washington is known to be a stoic, and is rarely one for ceremony. But on October 6th, sensing the importance of this siege, he dismounts and personally begins the digging of the first trench to be used to close in on the battered British-occupied village. 3 days pass, and the Allied lines are now within musket range of the British. Again, making a show to encourage his men, George Washington touches off the first cannon to commence their assault. His artillery consists of 3 24-pounders, 3 18-pounders, 2 8-inch howitzers, and 6 mortars. For nearly a week, the artillery barrage is ceaseless, shattering whatever nerve the British have remaining and punching holes in British defenses. From Denny's journal, "The scene viewed from the camp now was grand, particularly after dark. A number of shells from the works of both parties passing high in the air and descending in a curve, each with a long train of fire, exhibited a brilliant spectacle." On the night of the 14th, after firing incessant artillery to weaken British defenses, American and French forces prepare a surprise assault on redoubts number 9 and 10. The assault commences with a diversionary attack on a redoubt further to the north of Yorktown at 6:30, giving the appearance that the town itself is to be stormed. Hamilton's force, consisting of a detachment of 400 of his light infantry, now assault redoubt number 10 with bayonets fixed and muskets unloaded. The French simultaneously assault redoubt number 9, and after fierce fighting, both are cleared, and additional artillery is positioned at these locations. Cornwallis' position now has artillery and French-American troops on 3 sides, with the York River sealing the 4th. Desperate and cornered, Cornwallis orders 350 men to attack the American trenches, but they are ultimately driven back by French grenadiers. Another entry from Denny, dated the 15th. "Heavy fire from our batteries all day. A shell from one of the French mortars set fire to a British frigate. She burnt to the water's edge and blew up, made the earth shake. Shot and shell raked the town in every direction. Bomb-proof's the only place of safety." The next day, he continues, "This day, the 16th, our division manned the lines. Firing continued without intermission. Pretty strong detachments posted in each battery overnight. Amidst the shelling, Cornwallis now attempts an escape under the cover of darkness. His plan is to cross the York River and land at Gloucester, approximately 700 yards north, then march some 400 miles north to New York City. The first wave of boats used to cross the river made ground at Gloucester but was unable to return to ferry more of his men as a heavy storm began to rage. Out of options, Cornwallis throws his and his men's fate into the hands of the Americans. On the morning of October 17th, a lone British drummer boy beating parley and a British officer waving a white handkerchief tied to the end of a sword are seen on a wall at the forward position of the British lines. Again from Denny, in the morning, before relief came, had the pleasure of seeing a drummer mount the enemy's parapet and beat a parley, and immediately an officer holding up a white handkerchief made his appearance outside their works. The drummer accompanied him, beating. He later says of that morning, "The constant firing was too much for the sound of a single drum, but when the firing ceased, I thought I never heard a drum equal to it. The most delightful music to us all." Washington sends an officer to meet the British representative and orders the artillery to cease. We'll pick back up from Denny's account. "Our batteries ceased. An officer from our lines ran and met the other, and tied the handkerchief over his eyes. The drummer sent back, and the British officer conducted to a house in rear of our lines. Firing ceased totally." This British representative asks for an armistice to discuss terms for the surrender. The ceasefire, it's agreed, will last for 2 hours, during which time Cornwallis will send his proposal, and Washington agrees. The representative crosses back to behind British lines, and Cornwallis asks for the parole of his troops and their safe passage back to England. Washington replies that he feels no need to bargain and says Cornwallis' surrender must be made without condition. Americans were given no such terms in Charleston, and Washington is seeking retribution. Cornwallis, for his part, knows that his soldiers have been devastated by continual artillery fire from over the past weeks, that Clinton's reinforcements are weeks away, and that the resumption of hostilities will cause more death and bloodshed for his troops. Cornwallis delays his response, but finally agrees. On the 19th, the Articles of Capitulation are signed and terms are laid out for the British exodus of Yorktown. We have the transcript from these articles as well as a photograph of the original on our X today at 250 years of USA. One detail that I found interesting is that Cornwallis signs and writes beside it, "Done at Yorktown in Virginia, October 19, 1781," while Washington signs and beside it writes, "Done in the trenches before Yorktown in Virginia, October 19th, 1781. Washington and Rochambeau line up their soldiers in columns a mile long. Americans on the right, French on the left. At the beginning of the line sits Washington, solemnly mounted on his horse, while Rochambeau sits similarly at the end of the line. Cornwallis men march from the fort and carry their colors cased and their arms shouldered as they make their way through the columns. It's often reported that the British soldiers don't look at the Americans on their right. Each soldier throws down their arms in an ever-growing heap at the end of the line. Cornwallis claims he has an illness, so he is excused the embarrassment of surrendering in person to George Washington, though later depictions of this day show him present for the surrender. He gives his sword to British General O'Hara, who in turn presents it to Washington. Washington, however, silently moves aside and lets General Benjamin Lincoln claim the sword. A requital, as Lincoln was forced to surrender in Charleston last year. With the sword of the British general now claimed by the Americans, the 7,000 British soldiers are marched off to prison camps. Cornwallis is allowed passage back to the British-controlled New York along with his staff. We'll go back to Denny as he describes the Americans moving into Yorktown. "Glad to be relieved from this disagreeable station. Negroes lie about sick and dying in every stage of the smallpox. Never was in so filthy a place. Some handsome houses, but prodigiously shattered. Vast heaps of shot and shells lying about in every quarter, which came from our works. The shells did not burst as was expected. Returns of British soldiers, prisoners 6,000, and seamen about 1,000. Lord Cornwallis excused himself from marching out with the troops. They were conducted by General O'Hara. Our loss said to be about 300. That of the enemy said not more than 550. Fine supply of stores and merchandise had. Articles suitable for clothing were taken for the use of the army. A portion furnished each officer to the amount of $60. While a massive win for the Patriots, the siege at Yorktown is not the end of the Revolution, though it is often considered the beginning of the end. The British maintain a military presence throughout the United States, and they continue to fight, as we'll see, but the defeat and the capture of thousands changes the status quo. When the news of this defeat reaches London, it's reported that Lord North exclaims, "Oh God, it's all over." Washington, for his part, looks forward to a more peaceable winter. Elsewhere, on November 5th, John Hanson is elected president of the Continental Congress. Although the role is largely ceremonial, he is now tasked with moderating discussions, handling official correspondence, and signing documents. On December 20th, facing assaults from the combined fleets of Spain and France, the British Parliament decides it's time to negotiate peace. And in the last event we'll cover this year, the Bank of North America is incorporated on December 31st in Philadelphia, with Thomas Willing as its first president. Its initial capital is authorized at $400,000, much of the funds coming from private investors and a loan from France. The bank is empowered to issue notes backed by specie, gold and silver, and provide loans to the government to help meet its military payroll and supply obligations. That's it for 1781, a year that provides a much-needed and hard-earned victory for the Patriots. From the swamps of South Carolina to the gleaming Chesapeake Bay and beyond, bombs and bullets fly and blood soaks the soil that will soon host the greatest nation in the world. Whether through cunning tactics like those seen at Cowpens, luck and bravery like Jouette's Midnight Ride, or sheer strength and determination like that shown at Yorktown, it's now clear to Britain and the world, America is here to stay. As today marks the end of our first full week of recording and releasing these episodes, I would love to hear your thoughts. Get in touch by sending us a message on X or Instagram, or sending an email directly to 250yearsofusa@gmail.com. As the Revolutionary War begins to draw to a close, the nature of this show will shift a little bit more to the life and politics of a nation always on the move. I look forward to delivering these moments in time from the 17, 18, 1900s all the way up to our present day. Join us next time for 1782 as the smoke of battle thins. American patriots tighten their grip on independence, and America begins to strengthen its foreign alliances. Thank you for joining me. This has been Our Story, 250 years of the United States of America. And as always, thank you for listening.